As you can see in Revelation chapter 8 verse 10, and the third angel sounded in 1945 when the United Nations came into being, but what follows won't happen until the woe of the fifth trumpet, when Satan and his angels get cast to earth, which is when the one world political system comes into being after the United Nations, which is the great horn of the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8 verse 8, gets broken. And there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, meaning Satan when he gets cast to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet, but what follows won't happen until Satan appears as the Antichrist at the woe of the sixth trumpet. And it, meaning Satan, fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. To fall upon being a figure of speech that means to kill, in this case spiritually, at the woe of the sixth trumpet, when Satan appears as the Antichrist, which is when most Christians will be killed spiritually when they begin worshiping Satan instead of Christ, and the Christian nations, which are symbolized by the lion of Daniel chapter 7, become non-Christian nations. And then as you can see in Revelation chapter 8 verse 11, and the name of the star is called wormwood, and the third part of the waters, meaning most Christians became wormwood, and many men died spiritually of the waters because they were made bitter. The third trumpet lines up with the hidden dynasty of politics in 1945, which again is when the United Nations came into being, which is the great horn of the he-goat. But then once the United Nations gets broken, the one world political system emerges at the woe of the fifth trumpet, when Satan and his angels get cast to earth, which is when the 5-month-long hour of temptation begins, when the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7 all rise up together at the same time, including Daniel's fourth beast, which is exclusively supernatural. The second seal and the third vial line up with the third trumpet, so then 233, which again lines up with the hidden dynasty of politics, as well as Mark 13, beginning with verse 7, where Christ says, "And when ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, be ye not troubled, for such things must needs be, but the end shall not be yet," leading up to 1945, where the world wars, bringing about the United Nations, which again is the great horn of the he-goat, with the he-goat itself being the shadow government of the Kenites. For nation shall rise against nation, meaning the Kenite nation rising against itself through two warring factions on either the multipolar or the unipolar end of the globalist spectrum. The Kenites on the multipolar end of the globalist spectrum, for the most part, control Edom, which is the Russian Federation geopolitically, and the Ezekiel 38 Confederacy, which is now formulating, as opposed to the unipolarist Kenites, who for the most part control the left-right paradigm, which is symbolized by Ammon and Moab. Once the United Nations gets broken, the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8 becomes the leopard of Daniel chapter 7, meaning the Kenites and their four hidden dynasties providing the infrastructure for the one world system that won't come into being until the woe of the fifth trumpet, which is also when the Ezekiel 38 Confederacy becomes the bear of Daniel chapter 7, when the one world political system emerges, which will then be wounded to death, which is what kingdom against kingdom means in Mark 13, as well as Matthew 24 and Luke 21. As you can see in Daniel chapter 11 verses 25 through 27, the deadly wound will most likely come from the king of the south, which is the lion of Daniel chapter 7 at that point in the chapter, meaning one or more of the countries on one of the 7 continents, which will be geopolitically part of the lion, which is symbolic of the Christian nations, will most likely declare independence from the one world political system, which will wound the entire system to death, because without all the countries of the world participating, it can't be a one world system. As you can see in Revelation chapter 13 verse 14, the deadly wound will be by a sword, and as you can see in the second seal in Revelation chapter 6 verse 4, the rider of the red horse was given a great sword. And not only does Edom mean red, but part of the curse placed on Esau was that by his sword he would live, as you can see in Genesis 27:40. So then it could be that the influence of the Kenites on the multipolar end of the globalist spectrum through Edom on the Christian nations is what causes the deadly wound to the one world political system. And then after the deadly wound is when Satan appears as the Antichrist and the Christian nations become non-Christian nations, because that's when most Christians begin worshiping Satan instead of Christ, which is what Antichrist means. And there shall be earthquakes in diverse places, meaning major geopolitical shifts, especially the shift that happens after the deadly wound from a one world political system to a one world religious justice system when Satan appears as the Antichrist in the midst of Daniel's 70th week, which was 7 years but is now 5 months.